Hi, everyone. Welcome to Season 8, Episode 3 of The Fix. I'm Angel Borrelli, and I have with me here today Associate Head Coach Jon Watson. Hey, Jon, I'm so glad you could make it today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Angel. I appreciate it.
Oh, listen, I'm so happy to have you. And I first want to thank, I have a listener / father of a youth pitcher / volunteer coach from Florida, Jimmy. Thank you so much for referring Jon to me. So everyone, we're so excited. You're going to be excited because Jon is kind of the coach that other coaches call for advice. And I want to tell you why he has that role, because when you hear his background. So he was actually a closer at the University of New Orleans when he was in college, which is, I love that whole idea of being a closer, because you're wired completely differently than a starter. Am I right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And he's a former minor league pitching coach with the Angels, which is awesome. And that was in 2019. Is that correct, Jon?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And now he's the associate head coach at Chandler Gilbert Community College, which is actually in Chandler, Arizona. And you know, Jon, one of the reasons I love having you here is I don't think junior colleges are given enough, advertisement. They're so important because so many kids are not ready on the educational level. They're not ready for that big changeover to a university. But on a baseball level, how awesome it is that they have a place to go where they actually can kind of take the shock away from all of a sudden they're at a D1 or a D2 from high school, because it's such a transition. And when you and I spoke the other day, you said you were kind of talking about that, and you said something so important, and I want you to tell my audience about it. You were saying how you feel strongly that what your job is to develop the pitcher, that you don't necessarily want him to peak out when he's with you, but that your job is to develop him. And you were mentioning that in light of the fact that, you know, you are a coach, as you said to me, that first of all, you're educated, you have a master's degree, but that you always are looking for the best information because you do feel like your job is to develop the guys. So you want to give them the most current, the best kinds of things. But I love that you said that you said your job is really to develop them so that you're getting them ready for someone else. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's where I think junior college baseball is really, really important for guys. I'm a product of junior college myself. Like I played at a junior college before I went to the University of New Orleans. And I just know as a player, I was not ready to compete against 21-year-old guys when I graduated high school. I just wasn't ready. And I had the opportunity to play at a junior college. I was a two-way guy, so I got tons of at-bats. I got tons of innings, and it was huge. And so as a coach on that perspective, I just want our guys to continue to get better and develop. I really don't want their best to be with me. I want to prepare somebody to be really good at the Division I level or the Division II level, whatever level they end up going to. Like, I don't want them to peak when they're with me. I think it's more important for their best to be after they play with us.
So you're giving them the basic skills. So the kind of foundation and this is sort of how I deal with mechanics. If you give the pitcher the foundation, then they can continue to improve. If their foundation is shaky, they either go down or they stay where they're at or they get worse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things I was intrigued also about is when we were discussing and I was asking you, like, what are some of the current things going on with coaches in their heads about training, et cetera. And you mentioned that a lot of coaches call you, and that one of the things you used the word overwhelmed with information. I loved that conversation we had. And, you know, and you mentioned that first of all, we have information coming at us from all different directions. We just don't go out and look for it. We've got social media, et cetera, and everybody's got an opinion on something. And you mentioned that there's so much overwhelming and conflicting information, but that there are some categories of information that when coaches call you, and I think that's why you're so valuable, you're not just a voice for yourself right now. You're a voice for all the coaches out there that are in the same position you're in, especially junior college coaches, where they know that in a sense, these kids you pass off to other schools, that's your work. So you want to be doing a good job for the next level, the next coach that's going to get the player. Talk to me a little bit about some of the things that you hear out of other coaches' voices when they call you.
One of the biggest things, well, something I've been able to do with some of my pitchers over the past few years is increase velocity. Right, that's a big thing right now. Everybody's wanting more velocity. So that's something that people call all the time, like, hey, what are you doing to help increase velocity? Because there's just so many things out there. You get on Twitter and it's like, what do you believe? What am I supposed to do now to help my guys throw harder? For me, it's about movement. I think movement is king, but there's just so many things out there that people call and ask questions about, like, and velocity is the first thing that people ask about.
Interesting. Interesting. And do you feel like that the question involves, is there one thing you do it, or is there ever the position about looking at what he's doing to prevent his velocity from coming out? Do you ever hear that kind of thing, or is that more people they want like a black and white answer? Well, you do this, or you do this exercise, or you buy this piece of equipment. Is that your sense that they're looking for an answer of what to lay on top of the pitcher rather than go at it from a different way?
I think people are looking for a magic bullet.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I think they're looking for, like, what's the one thing I can do to increase velocity?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think velocity improvement is just a fix all. Like, there's so many factors that go into it. You talk about nutrition, you talk about stress, you talk about strength, you talk about movement profiles. Like, there's just so many factors. I think people just want a quick fix.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. One of the things I became concerned about last year when everybody went down on lockdown in last March, and we of course all thought, oh, this isn't going to last. Oh yes, we'll be playing baseball in July. Nobody really knew, and so the podcast that I did when everything stopped, we talked about some things to do, while they were at home, things you can do to keep your arm in shape, even though, you can't go near anybody. But one of my biggest concerns, which I think kind of came to fruition, is I was worried about people with all the time off coming back and there being a higher level of injury that we usually see.
Yep.
And in the major leagues, there were a lot of injuries right away when they eventually resumed. And this happened in the NFL as well.
Yep.
you know and I think every sport and now I know the minor league pitchers I worked with were sent home, and they've still been home, and then they pushed back the reporting date for minor leaguers till April 1st. So they've been home, and it was scary trying to grind it out, try to still get things done to keep them in shape. And so I find it interesting, and always find this interesting, that we know we've got to keep the injuries low, because if you have an injured pitcher, he's not going to throw hard, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So it's almost like, okay, if we put velocity, and I know you're absolutely 100% correct, because the reason why I know you're correct is because it's what pitchers talk about. They talk about wanting to throw harder before they talk about wanting to throw right. They also talk about wanting to throw harder even when their arm is hurting. So it's kind of an interesting, I don't know, bunch of topics. And when we were talking, you mentioned that arm care is number one, injury prevention is important, strength and conditioning, and then, of course, velocity. And I was thinking, after our conversation, is what's interesting and kind of can be intriguing to look at it this way, is that they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
They actually are all the same thing. In other words, it's like, okay, here's 5 steps for velocity. Now, here's 5 steps for strength and conditioning. Now, here's 10 steps for arm care. It's sort of like, if you take a perspective, not that you can't have the other interests, not that you can't still search for the answers and talk to all your colleagues about it, but if we as coaches take a one basic solid perspective where we start to say, okay, all of these topics are kind of in a similar category, and they kind of go together. And if we follow this as a basic plan, then we can maybe have another way of looking at how we're going to take one piece and improve that. Or we've got the pitcher in a position to where, let's say you did have a magic bullet, that he could handle it. I mean, you don't give a little kid a gun, right?
Hope not, right?
So there is a huge responsibility that goes with improving velocity. I mean, I'm always working with that as well. But I can tell you one thing, if his mechanics, see, sometimes the velocity is limited because the brain is so smart that it doesn't let the pitcher throw hard because he would hurt himself. You must have pitchers you can think of right now where you go, whoa, it's a good thing he's not throwing 98 because the way he throws is so weird that, he would hurt himself because there is a self regulating sort of system inside of the body. This might be the pitcher, John, that you've seen or have had where he throws 100, but he can't find the plate. He's wild. And it's because his mechanics aren't sound, but he's got that fire that we want to see in everyone. He's got that freedom of movement we want to see. But because he's off, he throws hard, but he has no control. When we know if you can't get outs, it doesn't matter how hard you throw, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so when we were talking and you mentioned these categories, and am I right about that? Velocity, arm care, strength and conditioning, reduction in injuries. Do these sound like the concerns of coaches?
Well, yeah, and I know that's one of the biggest concerns of mine is, if I'm trying to get one of these kids out, he can't be hurt.
Right,
With junior college is interesting. It's, you go through the high school period of recruiting, and then you go to junior college, and then you go through that same process of recruiting again. And in the conference that we're in, it's a pretty good conference. So we get a lot of colleges that end up coming to our games to watch our guys pitch. And if they can't be on the field and they can't pitch, then they can't get seen,
right.
right? So we got to keep our guys healthy for that. Number one, to win games, we got to win. But number two is we got to get these guys seen. And if you're not healthy, you can't be seen. And if you can't be seen, then it's really hard to go to that next school.
Exactly. Exactly. So, regardless of the fact that velocity and an interest in figuring out ways to get it is at the first thing that comes out of everybody's mouth, the real first thing on the list is getting that pitcher to be available to pitch.
Yeah, they have to be healthy enough to pitch. Yeah.
Exactly. So the way that I've done it, so my perspective as I was, when we were talking, so my perspective is and as a kinesiologist, so everything I do is about the way the muscles and the joints act in the pitching motion. So I had to come up with a perspective when I, started working with baseball pitching. I had to come up with, well, how am I going to deal with this? The coaches are like, you got to throw strikes, you've got to throw hard. But I'm looking at the body, and if I don't like what I see, well, I can't feed into that other arena. But I never was even drawn to it because my expertise was in movement. But here's what I found out very quickly, that if you could get the body of the pitcher to be absolutely fantastic every time he takes the hill, he's going to be the best pitcher he can be on that day. And then as that pitcher who's pretty good on every day becomes really good just because he's doing his job, then you can start overlaying some of the other things that might make him better. And then the other thing I came to was, if you do the basics, if you improve the pitcher's body, sometimes the pitch improves itself because he's repeating his job and getting better at it every day. But he's doing it the right way, or he's bringing the components that allow him to keep pitching. So my whole perspective was pitchers are very gifted. They've got a special skill. They get in their own way, then they end up not being able to use their gift. So if we kind of look at pitchers like they're gifted, and what are they doing that's getting in their own way? The pitcher who's always hurt.
Yeah.
The pitcher who's sloppy around the edges. He never even gets to the mound. He's always got something going on. And sometimes, if you're just isolating mechanics, you can ask that question too. What is he doing in his mechanics that's making him not throw as hard as he could? And trust me, that is the way for someone who works with the pitching motion, which is what my expertise is. There's usually something within the way that pitcher is pitching that is keeping him from throwing even harder. I mean, I've seen MLB pitchers that are in the high 90s, and I know they could throw harder if they didn't do this, this, or that. But they found a way to do it because they repeat it. If you repeat the same thing, you can get good at it. But sometimes that perspective on what's he doing that's keeping him from throwing harder. So for me, when I was doing my graduate work, that was kind of the way I decided, okay, if I can improve the body, then they can go on the mound and improve the thing they're good at. In other words, I'm not a pitching coach. I don't have to teach them how to pitch. They know how to pitch, or they have a pitching coach that works with them on the pitching, meaning the strategy, their pitches, what they're going to throw at a certain count, etc. But if I can take a look at getting them to be better when they step on that hill, then we can start to reduce injury. Then we can make them available for improvement. Does that sound like, a menu that can be workable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what's interesting about baseball is when I started in it, and I was a strength coach working with pitchers. So in 95, I introduced pitchers to strength training, and the coaches were going crazy. They were thinking, what are you going to do? So now I look at, well, being a strength coach, I'm always about being strong. I don't care what job you have, whether it's in sports or not, your body's everything. So I'm curious about at your school. Does a junior college have their own strength coaches, or are they staff on the baseball team that they actually do the strength training? Who handles all that?
Well, at our particular school, we actually have a full-time strength and conditioning coach who deals with all 9 of our sports.
Mm-hmm.
Our strength and conditioning guy, he actually was a strength coach in minor league baseball for 9 years. So he's got a very good baseball background, and he understands, like, on the professional side, the job of a professional strength coach is to keep his guys on the field, right? Because they're trying to move up from, rookie ball to low A to high A to double A to triple A. Like, they got to be on the field to move up. So he takes that kind of a stance with our guys in terms of, like, yeah, we want to get bigger, stronger, but we want to get healthy. We want to stay healthy. So he does a lot of that with our guys. Every junior college is going to be different. We're just lucky that we have that as a position inside of our athletic department.
Awesome. Well, one of the things that I like to do is talk a lot about myths. And because my perspective is so different, and also because I'm a specialist with baseball pitchers, I'm a strength coach that works only with baseball pitchers. I work only and with my troubleshooting skills only with baseball pitchers. So what I think would be great is, especially on these topics we discuss, is for me to tell you about what I think some of the biggest myths are. And a lot of times strength coaches that don't get a chance to specialize, and also my background with that plus kinesiology, it gives me such great perspective. And I always feel like the strength coach is one of your most important assets in a team. So I love hearing you have that whole system in place. One of the things that I do is, because strength coaches call me all the time and they say, is it true? Or I have a coach, he won't let me, the baseball coach is telling me what to do or what I can't do. Or this person's telling me, what I can and can't do. And I think unleashing a good strength coach on your pitchers could be like the best asset. So in developing a pitcher, what you do off the field has to come first before once he steps onto that field, the things he can do to stay healthy are of a different nature. But when he's not on the field, that's when you really can get the progress. So I think one of the biggest myths, and by the way, John, do you work out in a gym?
Yeah, my son's 13 and he's wanting to start getting stronger. So we go to the gym and we lift and stuff, but I wouldn't tell you that it's any good.
Okay. Okay. Because what I was curious about is if I could speak the language with you. So here's the thing about strength training. So here's some myths. And if your strength coach possibly needs to hear from someone else that some of the thoughts he's had are absolutely okay, that would be fantastic. But everyone out there, I know it's a questionable thing. So the biggest myth, and I hear this even when I go to professional meetings, the biggest myth out in the world is that pitchers should not do overhead work. And that is the absolute craziest thing I've ever heard because they throw and their arm is up over their head. And there's muscles that lift that arm up over the head. So that is one of the biggest myths. And yes, are there things that could be compromised for the pitcher? Well, let's put it this way. In the gym, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Exercises themselves don't have like a nature, like, well, there are some contraindicated movements that are bad for everybody because they come from the bodybuilding world where people think, oh, if this hurts, a certain position of the shoulder, it must be good. Well, that's not necessarily true, but eliminating some of the things that are absolutely ridiculous. And exercise doesn't just come out of the gate, oh, this is a bad exercise. It's how you do the exercise. There was a day when people thought deadlifts were bad. There was a day when they thought squats were bad or RDLs. No, you have to be taught how to do it correctly. It's the same thing when you say a curveball is bad. A curveball is not bad. The way it's taught is bad. Can't be bad. When you have someone or you're using words to explain it where the person doesn't really hear it. So you say something about the back position in a squat and the person doesn't hear it right and they do something crazy. So in the gym, the technique has to be perfect, but the myth of not going over the head is absolutely crazy. The shoulder joint has to be developed in every single way. The other myth that I think is really strange is that you're going to do high volume with light weight. Well, the deal about improving an athlete, because what you want is you want your pitcher to show up. So if you've got some great things to do with him, or new pitches you want to teach him, that his arm is in shape to learn all that. So when strength coaches are nervous, let's say the coach is standing over them and they have their hands tied, and maybe the strength coach, and listen, if you're an NSCA strength coach, which is the highest credential, I think the most respectable, then they all know what I'm about to say, but their coach might be like tying their hands. You do not train a pitcher just because he's a pitcher differently than you would train someone else when you're in a certain cycle of training. High reps and low weight that do absolutely nothing, they don't remodel the muscle on the inside. They're like something you would maybe give your 13-year-old if he's a beginner because his tendons aren't strong. But if he's 16 or 17, you've got to work with making the muscle stronger, which means you're literally remodeling it on the inside. So the way that you regulate the weights and the reps is the same thing you would read in a textbook if it's telling you this is what you do in this phase of training. And because they're in season, they're breaking down certain muscles. You can't just say, okay, it's September. We're not doing this anymore. And okay, but yeah, you can do it in July. No, you can't get behind the eight ball like that. So a strength coach has to cycle the training in terms of the overall objective. Maybe you're not in season thinking, I'm going to put size on this guy. But his rear deltoid, for example, which is the small muscle on the back of the shoulder, it's part of the deltoid structure. It's the rear head of the deltoid. It's a decelerator of the arm, and so are two of the rotator cuff muscles. When they did research, they found out that at the end of the season, there was atrophy, especially in the rotator cuff muscles. So what does that mean? That means the tissue is getting smaller and smaller. The tire's getting balder, more bald, and then by the end of the season, the tires and the brakes are completely worn out. So during the season, you have to actually keep on top of that muscle. So you have to train it to help it heal. You have to train it to help build it. So these are the kinds of things in strength and conditioning that can be completely, if you do these things, then you can keep the pitcher healthy. The other thing is that I think is critical for a strength coach to know, and actually for you to request of your strength coach, is, for example, so split finger fastballs get bad press, right? Do
Yeah.
you hear that? Oh, they're so bad on the arm,
They rip
right?
everybody's elbow, right? That's what you hear.
Yes. So let me tell you. Okay. So first of all, when people are saying elbow, they it's just because the elbow's up there and that's the joint they know. The forearm is the body part that gets stressed that causes problems with the quote unquote elbow. The UCL is usually strained, torn, or whatever from forearm problems. A split finger, because the fingers are split apart, has a different range of motion for the forearm. So if the pitcher, and this is true for a slider, not so much a slider, it's not as strange as people think, but let's say let's talk about a curveball and let's talk about a split finger. They're probably the ones that get the worst press, right?
Yeah.
And they're fabulous pitches, right?
Yeah. They're unhittable.
They make the ball do crazy things. I love it. I'm more like, no, they're don't tell me the ball doing that is hurting the arm. Guess what's hurting the arm? Not balancing out that you do that. For example, in the gym, construction workers come in after work and I say, I can't believe it. They come in, they're all dirty, they go shower and they train. I go, I can't believe you're training after you've been swinging a hammer all day. If I didn't train, I would be hurt. And I go, interesting. So after 8 hours of swinging a hammer, now they're in swinging weights around. If a pitcher's going to throw a curveball, if a pitcher's going to throw a splitty, if a pitcher's going to throw any pitch, you have to have some knowledge of the way the wrist works in that pitch. For example, the way the wrist works in a curveball, it's the only pitch that has that action at the wrist. All the other pitches have similar releases. There's more similar to a fastball in terms of an action at the wrist. They have a little bit of rotation, but not so different than like the curveball with the other releases. So if you've got these other releases, and then you've got the curveball, and then let's say you've got something that's affecting the position of the forearm. And this also is true for sliders, especially because when you're working on them, you have to practice them so much. You have to take yourself into the gym and you have to do forearm work and wrist work so that as you're practicing that pitch, which is new, you're not fatiguing and tearing up the muscle. In other words, you're treating that muscle the same way you might treat your low back or your legs or your butt muscles or muscles that intuitively have to be strong. And I think that strength coaches don't get a chance to make that connection because they're isolated over here. See, their strength coach and I work with their motion. So, of course, I'm always connecting those dots. So the first thing I find out is what types of pitches do you throw? And so the split finger, for example, has a different type of rotation on the forearm. And that's why it's such an amazing pitch. So that pitcher who's throwing that has to be able to bring a fresh forearm. So it's got to be a strong forearm. And now here's where when I mentioned the way all these desires that a coach has, they're all the same thing. So here we've got an example. We know the number one reason for pitchers to get injured is that their muscles are fatigued when they're pitching. And this can be a shoulder muscle, a chest muscle. It can be a forearm muscle. Most guys with UCL surgeries say they had forearm fatigue for months or they were having tightness. So it's an indicator. So let's say let's say you're concerned about injuries. So now you've got a kid in the gym training his complete body. Then you're matching the strength and conditioning to his pitches for what his forearm and wrist are going to go through. which is critical. They're the things that go through different things based on pitches. Their mechanics should be such that the rest of their motion looks the same. So now you've got him in there working on that. So now he's less fatigued. So now he comes on the field, and now you want to work with him on this pitch because he needs more practice with it. You're good to go because he's not fatigued because it's stronger and it can take more. And plus, he's going to get in the gym after he pitches and work that muscle to get blood in there to help it heal. The same thing with the rear of the shoulder. You've got a pitcher who is coming here, you're working with them, and let's say he throws heat. The back of his shoulder is a mess. I mean, race cars, they change their tires every few laps for a reason. So that the harder you throw,
Yeah.
the back of the shoulder is going to take a beating. So now you're tying in the pitching, you're tying in the training, you're tying in the freshness. And guess what you get? You get a guy that you can work with longer because he's not hurting all the time. You get a guy who's believing in his body. So do you see how cool the connection of the body and the gym can actually help him once he walks through the gate of the field? And then you have other things you have to do, but do you see how that can be such a great connection? And I think in the strength and conditioning world, there's not enough of that connection.
Yeah, I see that a lot where there's no synergy between the strength coach and sometimes the baseball coaching staff.
Exactly. And you, as an associate head coach, I'm inspiring you to have a conversation with these guys and say, hey, here's my pitchers that come to you. This is the pitches they throw. That's strength coach. So, as a strength coach, one of the things that we do when we have to become certified, and listen, it's the hardest test I took, and I have a master's degree. It was hard. You have to do a needs assessment. So just like a wide receiver, you're going to assess and go, okay, he needs to run a fast 100. He needs to run a fast 40. You're going to look at a pitcher and go, he's throwing a curveball. He needs a strong wrist in this action. He needs to have this form. And oh wow, look at he's also throwing this. Okay, well we're going to develop the fingers, the wrist. He's going to do rice bucket, wrist stuff, forearm stuff. Now you've got that you're taking care of that guy off the field, which is where he gets everything that he can bring to the field. And I think there isn't enough of that. And I think baseball coaches should be a little more brave about letting them do these things, but also make the strength coach step up. And yes, they have a heck of a job. I mean, could you imagine being the head coach for 5 different sports? I mean, it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But if they've got your guys in there, if they're not spending time on the weaknesses of a pitcher, back of the shoulder all season long, forearms all season long, wrists all season long. And guess what? Arm training too, that's prescribed specifically around when that pitcher is pitching and not pitching. But those are the parts that get injured, and the gym can actually save them. And it's why I know my guys don't get injured, is because they've been training is one of the biggest parts of keeping them improving. But mostly, like you were saying, they've got to be healthy enough to show up. And that's the key. And that's how that can tie together off the field. What do you think your strength coach would say if you said to him, I want you to research, because this is their job. I want you to research what the wrist does in a curveball. And I want to make sure this guy has that strength because he throws a nasty curveball and I don't want there to be any problem. What do you think he would say?
He would probably be all for figuring out a way to keep a guy on the field.
Absolutely, he would be. He'd jump for joy and he would tell everybody, I've got the best head coach in the world. Yeah. So to all the coaches out there, bring your strength coach in. Let him do his thing. Strength coaches are amazing. We have tricks up our sleeves that you cannot believe. And don't be afraid to share with them. Hey, you know what? This guy, after the third inning, his stride keeps changing and he's not even having fatigue in his arm, but it looks like he gets wobbly on that front leg. Could you do something to fix that wobble? You fix the wobble of the pitching motion in the gym. You fix what you do in the pitching motion on the hill, but in the gym. So I think coaches should with this whole thing about guys coming back right now who haven't played for a while and all this sensitivity we have to injuries. I think now's the time for coaches and strength coaches to work more in alliance with each other. And strength coaches and head coaches, you guys have to be the ones that do it because strength coaches work for you and they do tiptoe around. And remember, they are coming from probably a background where they heard somewhere, be careful with the pitchers. Be careful with the pitchers.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of strength coaches treat pitchers with kid gloves sometimes. Like they don't push them too hard because they want to like conserve energy or something.
Which I think is so unusual because isn't the pitcher the guy with the responsibility of the game in his hands?
At all points in time.
Yeah, and of course I'm talking to a former closer. You guys are nails anyway, right?
Right.
You're wired to be 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Yeah, I always, when I got into working with pitchers, which was started in 1995 as a strength coach, I heard pitchers are the babies. And I'm looking at the catcher who's a beast, and I'm looking at the pitcher, and I'm thinking to myself, why is the catcher a beast? And he's huge, and he's like, he's got that presence. And why does the pitcher look like this? And it just never made sense. And thank God it didn't. And thank God I wasn't really involved in baseball because I could come from a completely neutral perspective on all this. I was actually so dumb about it that I was smart about it. Like, hey, why I don't understand why my pitcher can't train his chest. What? No, he's training his chest. Like, who doesn't train their chest? Like, you go in and you only do what? Your calves? And I mean, it was so, it was sort of like my innocence is what had me be aggressive. And then it just transformed itself. And now look at it nowadays. Pitchers train
Yep.
and they're bigger and better every day and they need to be. So now back to this topic, let's tie velocity in with this. Well, the shoulder joint produces velocity. Okay, it produces the max velocity of the pitch. The velocity of that joint is being sent down to the wrist, which is the last joint that imparts velocity. The velocity of the rotation gives the gas to the shoulder joint. Okay. And the shoulder joint can take all this in at one time, and it's got the biggest tank. So you have to have a pitcher who is strong around the shoulder. So let's say you're thinking, how do I get more velocity out of my pitcher? But you, one, are looking at him and he's got little teeny tiny shoulders and maybe his lower body's big, but you look, or let's say you look at his right shoulder, let's say he's a righty, and his right shoulder's hanging 3 inches lower than his left one. Or he's always wants ice, or he's always grabbing his shoulder. Now, even without a mechanics analysis that might tell you that he's not delivering the ball correctly, even if you show him how to, let's say he's not using his shoulder correctly, and let's say you can show him that. If he's got those other issues going on, you're wasting your time with even thinking about improving velocity. Improve the shoulder in the gym and also with things he needs to do on the field to prepare his shoulder and then to recover it that are strictly things that have to do with movement. When you do that, you're going to see a change. Not that you've increased his velocity, you've gotten his shoulder able to produce the velocity that it's capable of, given the state it's in right now. And then you can start to impart some of the other tricks you have up your sleeve for him. But you see how sometimes if we don't start outside the field and move our way inward, then you might be doing something. You might be putting the cart in front of the horse.
Yeah.
And I know you have a lot of background because you do a lot of research because I know your knowledge level. And don't you agree that sometimes we're looking, like you said, for the answer or this gimmick or this thing, when really we're looking at a car that can't move because the gas tank's empty, not because it has some mechanical problem.
Yeah, I think there's so many things. Like I think strength is a big piece of velocity, and I think everyone's looking for that magic bullet. Like, I just want to throw hard today. Well, there's things out there that can help you throw a mile an hour harder today, but like, it's not going to sustain. And I think that's the key, right? Is velocity improvement with sustainability.
Yes, and the word that you guys love, repeatability.
Yeah, yeah, a big word in the pitching world, right?
Yes, repeatability, consistency, absolutely. Owning the movement,
Yep,
understanding the movement, which was one of the things I was impressed when we talked about because you understand the motion. I think, you have more vernacular about it than most coaches because, in a sense, it's outside of your wheelhouse. You weren't hired because you understand the way a muscle works on the body. You know how to teach pitchers how to pitch.
yep,
Yeah, and so you're about the pitching and the game and the strategy, which is very much needed. There are those of us in other areas that can do the job of producing guys to hand them over to you and say, "Okay, here, John, he's strong enough, go for it." Yeah, knowing how to do things correctly and how to not set yourself up for failure because you're not turning over all the stones. And speaking about turning over all the stones, you can't be good on the field if you're not prepared once you're on the field. And one of the other things you were mentioning when we were speaking is about actual arm care, which is different than strength training the arm.
yeah,
Arm care is really making sure it's prepared. And because there are so many we talked about it, there's so many ways that people are having pitchers throw the ball. They could be weighted balls. They could be throwing far. They could be doing this. They could be spinning around. They could be using a different size ball. I mean, there's more ideas and training methods for throwing that small little ball than I can even imagine. And I think that, and every day there's something new. Am I right?
always, yes,
And it's got to be confusing. But one thing is for sure is I don't care what it is you're doing, whether you're throwing the 5.5-ounce ball, you're throwing a weighted ball, and this isn't a show about, talking about what I believe or what I don't believe, but here's what I do know. If that shoulder joint isn't prepared correctly before it throws anything, and if it isn't recovered correctly from what it just did, you're going to have a pitcher who every time he takes the mound, he's going to be less than the day before. And when you keep that going through a season, you've got a guy who's on the IL in like 6 weeks.
yeah,
And I think not enough attention is paid to, especially the recovery from things we ask our pitchers to do. We have to recover them from pitching. But if they're doing other things that are other than that pitching, we already know it doesn't matter the distance or the way. Once you go beyond what your skill is asking you to do, it is different. I think we can all agree on that. Science has a way, the biomechanists actually can quantify how much it changes. Like, oh, this is your stride changes this much when you throw from 90 feet, or your shoulder forces change this much when you're throwing a weighted ball, or blah, 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 whatever. It doesn't matter. I think we all agree it's got to be different. Just like if you're 60-foot flat, it's going to be different. 60 feet flat, it's going to be different than 60 feet downhill, right?
yeah.
So I think one of the things that coaches need, what I would like to see them being concerned about is look at your guys when they're doing all this stuff and just kind of really see, yeah, well, you know what? I love it. And this isn't to say you love it or you should do it or not do it, but look at it and say, you know what? It is different for that shoulder. He's got to recover from that.
So, what do you think? Can you give me some like practical exercises for my guys to do in recovery?
Yes. Well, so I actually have a program called the First Pitch Strike Arm Preparation and Recovery Program, and I can tell you exactly the exercises that are in the recovery part. So when a kinesiologist develops a program, so if you would see one of my guys doing my program, you're going to see very distinct straight lined movements. And it's pitching, but it doesn't look like pitching. It mimics the actions at the joint. When you look at some other popular warm-up programs with a resistance band, they look more like pitching. Some of the movements almost look like they're pitching, but they're warming up, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you have a recovery program, you've got to say to yourself, before you can design a program, before I designed my program, and this was one of the first things I did fresh out of graduate school, I had to say, what happens when a pitcher pitches? And by my approaching your question this way, John, it helps you be more creative, which is my job with coaches, not to say you have to do this or that, but if I give you the concepts. So what happens in the pitching motion, and I'm going to say it in the simplest way, everything in the front of the body gets tight.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in the back of the body gets loose.
Gotcha.
And when I say the upper body, so picture this, the front of the body, the muscles on the front of the body are producing the force so the arm goes forward. So it's like a bench press in motion, right?
Yep.
So you get tight in your chest from a bench press. Okay. Everything in the back of the shoulders, pulling the arm bone back towards the body. Guess why? So you don't lose your arm. So if the rotator cuff gets loose back there, then it can't control the arm throw on the next time it throws. So that's why we see this wear and tear on the back of the shoulder. So everything on the front gets tight in the upper body. This is the easiest way to say it. Everything in the back of the shoulder gets loose. So what do we do? Well, so that's one piece of knowledge. Now, here's a piece of knowledge that this is something I believe. I've never been a fan of fully quote unquote stretching because the body has a lot of mechanisms in the muscle that will stop it from going to the distance it needs to go for you to actually restore that length of the muscle that's tight. So what I have always felt, and this is because you just got done pitching, your arm's sensitive, and we don't want a shoulder capsule to be loose. So when you overstretch your capsule, that's not good. I mean, what's the first thing that happens when you break something or sprain something? They tie it up tight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I want you to go back to how you felt after, and even closers, because you throw at such intensity. So the back of your shoulders loose, the front of the shoulders tight. Well, what's the best way to release something tight is to contract the muscle that's opposite of it. And the beauty of the pitching muscles is the parts that get really tight on the front, right behind it, they're really loose. So by contracting the muscle that's loose, you're putting its integrity back in. You know, the elastic on your sweatpants that get loose, it's like tightening them back up again. But also because it's contracting, the muscle on the front lengthens. So now you're getting this natural lengthening. And see, for me, when I started working with pitchers, and listen, I knew that I had arms in my hands that if I destroyed them, I'd be in big trouble. Plus, I was already getting a reputation because, who the heck is she? She being the operative word. Secondly,
Yes.
she wants our pitchers to lift weights. So, and I've never injured any client I've had from lifting weights. So I put all those pieces together and said, I know I'm going to come up with a program to contract the back. So while there's like 26 movements that take about 6 minutes in the pre-pitching, to warm up the joints, there's 6 exercises in the recovery. So my guys go immediately to the fence, and this is what they address. They restore the back of the shoulder, meaning the rear deltoid, and the external rotators of the rotator cuff. They restore their tricep muscle. They restore their lat muscle. And if you start to restore that, what you do is you stretch the chest, you stretch the bicep. Bicep gets tight from decelerating. The tricep, when you contract it, stretches the front of the arm. You picturing this?
Mm-hmm.
By doing movements, simple movements. So a rear deltoid like a reverse fly, an external rotator exercise for the back of the shoulder, tricep exercises for the back of the arm. When you start to do those things and some rows for the lat, then you start to stretch the front, you restore the back, and guess what? You've not only now restored length and in sort of an inputting of integrity in the strength, the stretch muscles, you bring blood in to the entire joint. And so blood is healing. So the immune factors that heal the fibers are carried in the blood. So now you've just gone to the one place that feels tight and awful, and you're restoring it. You do that every time you play catch, you throw, you pitch. You see, pitchers think it's different depending on what they're doing. It isn't different. I don't care if you're playing catch just, the day after to keep your arm loose. You still have to prepare the joint. You still have to recover it. You have to do it consistently. Now, when you do that, now you go to the mound and you are capable of being who you were yesterday. If you if you don't take care of yourself today, all your tomorrows diminish in order. And you end up, as I said, on the IL, these guys who can't make it 6 weeks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that thought process for sure.
Yes, and using a resistance band. So my guys that are 12 and my guys that are 24, they're using the same band. It's a preparation for the shoulder and a recovery. It's not a weight training program. You do the lifting. So the band is 5 pounds or less, and you use that for specific exercises. And then what you've got is something fantastic. And I'm going to send you the program that I designed, John, to
Thank
thank you for coming on the program. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can do it yourself as a pitcher. Do you still play catch, by the way?
you. Once in a while, and now I'll get into throwing more batting practice here pretty soon. So I'm going to have to get my arm back in shape a little bit.
Well, great. But guess what? So one of the things that I did when this COVID thing hit is I got everybody, all the coaches in the area, I got them this program. If you do this program, it's as if you throw. So I love, and so first of all, I wouldn't do anything unless I don't give my pitchers one workout. I do every workout they get myself. And fortunately, I've been lifting weights my whole life, so I can do that because I have to test it out. I want you to start this program before you start throwing BP. And then I want you to see how your arm feels. And it will feel when you throw that first ball, you're not going to get that first ball aching. And I guarantee this. And the reason why I know it, because you're probably wondering, well, how do I know that? Because I don't pitch. Well, the reason why it became a program is because my pitchers were raving about it. The coaches were raving about how good the pitchers' arms were feeling. And they finally said, Angel, we just can't keep remembering these. Could you please make it like on a DVD or whatever, which is how the product is. And that's how it became an actual product. It was just something I designed because that's what strength coaches do. We find out what's weak, what's tight, what needs to be big, what needs to have range, and then we go right into the next column and go, that's this muscle, that's this joint, and that's this movement. And then we match the movements. It's kind of a cool thing. So you can come up with a program that is exactly designed to do what you need for it to do. So, and here we are again, we're tying in all these topics. So if you're throwing 95 today and your muscle in the back isn't getting restored, you can't decelerate. You also can't control where your hand is going because your shoulder's getting weak in the back. And now what you have is a guy who's missing. Then he tries to overthrow because he's missing. So now he's getting worse. And then before you know it, he's got less velocity, less location. So what happened? He didn't prepare his arm. He also didn't rebuild it. So when we're talking back again at what is the number one topic of the day, it's get in the gym, restore on a muscle level, get on the field, prepare and recover the arm correctly. And when you do that, then you at least can make sure that pitcher is capable of doing what he's doing today. I mean, getting them to throw harder is one thing, but making sure they don't start throwing less hard. And isn't that the first symptom you see when you get a pitcher who ends up being injured?
Yep, velocity usually goes down.
Exactly. So this way you're kind of building into all that. So do you see how all these things kind of come together?
Well, yeah, I'm a big believer that everything affects everything.
Exactly.
So if you're not taking care of business in the weight room, you're not taking care of your arm care, like there's going to be an impact somewhere.
Exactly. So now, do you have any other burning questions or questions that coaches have asked you and you've all been scratching your head about that you think I could be of some help with? Because any question you have, there's a coach out there listening right now that has the same question.
So like one of the big questions is, okay, so I just finished pitching, 5 minutes ago or whatever. And the old adage was go run polls. And now some guys are like, just go run sprints. What is the right thing to do? Because there's just so many different things out there.
Okay. Well, there aren't different things if you consult an exercise physiology textbook. And if you consult the textbook, and if you went on Google and you looked up AT as in Thomas, P as in phosphate, we'll use that word, ATP pathway, you would see that the ATP pathway, if that's the type of athlete that you are, meaning that's the energy type that you use, which is different than my son is a cross country marathon runner. He has to run and he runs for 2 hours at a time. That would be called a different pathway. There's pathways, they have different names. My son, who runs a 2 mile track, that's what he does. That's a different pathway. A pitcher, a golfer, somebody who runs 40s, the combine, the guy who's getting ready for the NFL combine, he's going to do exactly what I'm going to tell you, which is what a textbook will tell you on an ATP pathway athlete, which is what pitchers are. So that pathway is for someone who does one movement. The movement itself takes less than 20 seconds. He has full recovery between each of those things he does. And that's the pathway that you would use, and that's the way you train it. So the guy who's getting ready for the NFL combine, and let's say speed is his need. Let's say he's not below 4.5. He's going to run 100% for that 40. He's going to fully recover because that pathway doesn't work real well when you're out of breath. When you're out of breath, your body's producing lactic acid. Out of breath means out of things inside your lung that cause accumulation of acid. He's going to let his breath calm down, which means the insides got rid of that stuff. And listen, I'm breaking this down. This is a very complicated thing, but I'm breaking it down as easy as possible. So for all you
Yeah.
physiologists out there, don't be writing me letters. But anyway, I'm getting the point across. Then he turns around, he's fully recovered, and his breath tells you he's recovered. So now you know he's not producing more acid and stuff. And when that acid's in there, it gets caught in the muscle and makes him go slow. So he's completely clean now. He runs another 40 and he's able to run another 40 at 100% because guess what? He didn't have any acid accumulating and he was fully recovered. He's going to recover again. And the more in shape he gets, the less recovery he needs. But that's not the goal. The goal is running 140, as fast as you can. And he's training for that. So, and I'm using football as an example because sometimes it's easier to see it because we all know how fast these guys run. Because it's hard to picture a pitcher. I don't get how he's using that pathway, but he is. So now you've got a guy who can do repeats. He's not accumulating lactic acid. He's working on his speed because he's working at 100%. And the second that guy starts running, let's say he's running 4.5s, 4.4s, and you're a good speed speed coach and you see he starts running 4.7s, okay, you're done. That just means he's tired. Okay, now that's the pathway a pitcher has. Now, what does that actually mean? It means the inside of his muscles have fibers that use that pathway. Guess what? They're the big fibers, the fast ones. So we want to make sure we keep developing them. That's number one. Number two, actually, number one is don't do something that makes him have less big fibers today that he had yesterday. That's number one. Number two, let's always do things that promote the growth of big fibers. Because, see, the body goes, well, why do I need a Lamborghini engine in here if he's sitting on the couch all the time? The body moves out all the big fibers, puts in little ones because it's more economical. So you don't want to do things that change that makeup that he's probably got because guess what? He's a power athlete. Now, I know it doesn't look that way because we don't think of pitchers one as athletes and we don't think of them. We talk velocity, but we don't talk power, but it is power. And so you're dealing with a particular type of athlete, only the ones that do something that takes 20 seconds or less. Because the minute it goes beyond 20, they start moving into a different pathway. And when the brain figures out you're using a different gas tank, it starts doing other things. And most of the time, the first thing it does is move out those fast fibers. So, with that being said, you can make the inside of a pitcher's muscles physiology slower by having him run distance. You can create problems for that pitcher when you have him running when he's out of breath because the body, if it senses that you're getting out of breath a lot, starts to put in things inside the muscle to help you get rid of all the breakdown you're getting because you're out of breath. Those things that develop takes up room and it changes chemistry. So you don't want to do that either. That is why if I see a coach go, yeah, Angel, I'm so happy I heard about sprints. Yeah, my guys don't run, my pitchers run a 40 or 100. And hundreds are kind of cool because they're done in less than 20 seconds and you get to really blow out your carburetors. But a pitcher has to be able to run 20s really well. He has to be able to run a 10. He has to be able to get to first base possibly. You want to think about what does he have to do? But he doesn't really ever have to go beyond 60 feet. But because we want to develop that pathway, you can go all the way to 100. But guess what? He's got to fully recover before he starts again. Plus, you're not going to see 100% effort. And you see what you want is a pitcher who can repeat a power performance. See, when you look at a pitcher and you don't have background, the first word that comes to your mind is, and I understand this, and this isn't a judgment of coaches. This is why you need people who can answer these questions for you that have background in it. Just like if I needed to know what type pitch to throw in a certain count, I'm going to call you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want a good pitcher to throw. Okay, let's say he's warmed up, he's in the first inning, and he's bringing it at 99 miles an hour. Don't you love when he's in the fifth inning and he's still throwing 99?
Absolutely.
That's called a power repeat. It's called power, and I'll use the word endurance, being afraid to use it, because a casual person says, my pitcher needs endurance, right? He's got to be out. Like you might say, oh, I don't need endurance. I'm a closer. My starter needs endurance. No, your starter and you need to be able to repeat what is called a power. You're not a ping pong player, okay? You're a pitcher. You have one chance to throw one ball as hard as you can. And I don't care what type of pitch it is. Isn't your motion the same? It's the grip that slows it down. So you want him to be able to throw hard each time with, of course, all the things we've talked about with a great arm, great mechanics, nice and healthy. He's not getting fatigued because he's healthy. But he's also got the physiology, the gas tank, the carburetors nice and tuned up so he can repeat all those pitches at that velocity. That is a power athlete, and that is what a pitcher is. So if you don't train him like that, you don't support that part. Because is the pitcher ever, I know you guys breathe deeply when it's intense, okay, and you're a starter. And of course, pitchers have different timing. But in the sense of being completely out of breath, you're not really out of breath.
No.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So you won't, if you're doing a sport that requires you, a basketball player, for example, is he playing out of breath? Yes. When he comes to the free throw line, is he out of breath? Yes. So does he train the way I just said a pitcher should train? Absolutely not. He needs all those little roads in there and everything that help him when he gets to the free throw line. Calm down his breathing as quickly as possible. Get rid of the lactic acid that's accumulating at high levels so he doesn't freeze up when he goes to raise his arm. And when you see a pitcher taking those bounces, that's what he's doing. He's settling the inside. So, in physiology, in exercise physiology, it's completely different for the needs of each type of athlete. That's why, John, I feel badly that you coaches wonder, how should he run? Can you see how there's not even a question about it in terms of if you're matching the needs of the type of athlete?
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. And guess what? Because I've looked at this. And actually, the first thing I did out of graduate school, well, I was in graduate school, and my thesis was on the lower body, and running was one of the chapters. And I took this team, this coach let me, this junior college coach. I said, can I please have your guys? I want to do an experiment. He's like, oh, yeah. And we started with this type of running. Nobody could even believe it. They thought it was insane, but he gave me the whole team. So I'm like, wait a minute, I'm only focusing on pitchers. So I said, well, okay, well, how far does a if you hit an in the park home run, how far are you actually going? So then I started going, and sometimes maybe he ran like crazy to second base. So he's out of breath, right? So let's say maybe the next hitter hits something. He might be a little bit out of breath, but basically your position players, how long does it take for a guy, if he hits an in the park home run, how long does it take for a guy? Let's just talk to third base. How long does it take him to get to third base if he's running straight from the plate?
This is about what, 12 seconds, 13 seconds?
Exactly. So if he's running, if it takes him 20 seconds, you're going to be upset, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to have a pinch runner in there for him. You're like, okay, you're out of here.
Yeah, for sure.
So guess what? It's not different for them either. Now, here is the way I knew they needed to run differently. When I first started hanging out at this junior college, watching the pitchers and learning and then talking to the coach, I would watch the pitchers. There was a track right there with the junior college. I would watch the pitchers going over because he would have them run a mile after practice. The pitchers, especially, I've never seen the worst running in my life. And I said, I mean, their technique and everything, plus they're exhausted and they're not wired. That this is like if you take a sprinter, an Olympic sprinter, and you tell him to go out and run a few hours, he's not going to want to do it. He's going to be unhappy and he's not going to be good at it. That's your first proof that you're doing something wrong. You have to match the wiring and the needs, and pitchers are wired to do that. And I always said, show me a pitcher that wants to run distance, and I'll show you a pitcher that does not throw hard. And it's as simple as that. Now, does that make sense? Does this sound totally crazy?
No, I like it.
Because you're liking science right now. And I hate using that word because it's being beat up these days. But like I said, anybody who doesn't trust me, go look up ATP pathway. It'll tell you all the conditions. Less than 20 seconds, blah, blah, blah. It'll talk about the fibers. It'll talk about the chemistry. But I'm not making it up. It's actually true. And when a strength coach does what we call in our world, the strength coach world, we do what's called a needs assessment. So that would be because I worked with all types of athletes, only athletes before I started working with pitchers in 95. The first thing I'd have to say, because I was dealing with sports I didn't know anything about, and I'd say, okay, well, tell me about your sport. Okay. And then I would have to analyze, I'd have to go to the science and analyze the sport, figure out the muscles that are used, the joint actions, but I had to figure out the energy pathway that was used. For example, I didn't know that out of all the sports, the wrestlers are considered to be the top fit athletes because they use multiple energy pathways. I'll never forget when I read that and I said, who would think that? But then when you watch them, you can see it. They get out of
Yeah.
breath, but then they go for a long time and they have to be strong in one motion. Anyway, so that's the way that we answer questions about what should a pitcher do. And that's how a pitcher should run. And that's how you'll develop, that's how you'll know that remember I said we don't want to leave stones unturned.
Yeah.
If they're training right, if they're running right, if they're preparing their arm correctly, if they're recovering correctly, and if you're paying attention to what they're doing and giving them recovery from it, you're going to have your guys walking through that gate, entering the field in the best shape they can possibly be in because you didn't leave any stones unturned. Then on top of that, you can start to focus on one individual skill they need, or one even to be brave enough to teach them a new pitch, knowing they're going to go in and recover their forearm from that. They're going to go in and recover their wrist from the curveballs, especially when they're throwing more than you would normally have them throw because they have to practice it. So when you start to do all that, then you can start to deal with the frosting on the cake, which to me, the cake and the frosting and the candles are all the extra stuff. But if you don't bake that cake correctly, then the rest it's not going to work out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So that's such a great question, Jon. Well, Jon, do you have any other burning question before we end the show?
Not for today, but I'm sure I will soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, just so everybody knows, we had a conversation and he mentioned to me some of these topics. So all these topics came from Jon. And what I love about it is I know that and they came because of questions he gets asked as well. But I know that what you've done today is represent a lot of coaches out there that are trying to connect the dots between believing what they're reading and understanding. But just know this, depending on a person's background, they're going to have a different perspective. You know that saying? I don't even know what the saying is. If you call a contractor with a hammer to fix a problem, he's going to use a hammer to fix it.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Know who you're talking to. Know who you're talking to. If you're talking to a pitcher and asking about mechanics, he's going to tell you what he feels, but it's not necessarily what's really going on because he's the one that was doing it. If you ask a scientist or a sports physiologist or a kinesiologist what's going on, our answer is going to be different because we've studied the joints. So always know that's one way to evaluate who's answering this question. And if it has to do with physiology or the inside of the muscle, then you need to talk to someone who has that background. That's why your strength coaches are so valuable. And they would love that kind of freedom to make some of those decisions and help you. A good strength coach can help you set up a running program. If you say to him, hey, run up a program, and hopefully he will know all these details. But yeah, programs are fantastic. And guess what? Your players are going to love it because it'll make them feel like them and not like somebody else.
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't feel right. So anyway, well, Jon, I thank you so much for sharing all these questions and these topics with me to help make this program so successful today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yes, and I loved having you on. And I thank all my listeners for listening. And you can find this podcast on Angel Borrelli Pitching on YouTube or on Facebook or in iTunes. And you can go to www.gymscience.com if you're interested in the program that I talked about for preparation and recovery or for any of my other products. And you can also email me with any questions you have, angel@gymscience.com. So thank you, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.